Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Well, friends, I want to welcome you to another edition of Jesus Changes Everything. And on this particular edition, I'm happy to welcome a guest. This particular guest is not on the show because he is an accomplished medical doctor specializing in emergency medicine. He's not on the show because he while in college, wrestled for the Penn State University wrestling team, which earlier this year, at least, was ranked number 2 in the nation. I know it's a significantly competitive program. He's not here because he served as a medical doctor among the Navajo Nation, nor because he served with the special ops arm of the Air Force. He's here because he's a friend of mine from way back in the day. Welcome, Dr. David White.
Thank you, sir. It is good to be reconnected with you. I've just, as you were talking, I was calculating. I think we've officially known each other for 50 years, or maybe 49 years.
Yeah,
for more accurate.
Believe it or not, one of my very first memories, I don't know whether it was something you said or whether it was something you said. I don't know if you were like mocking me, but what I remember is you saying, "You want to play in the dirt pile?"
It's funny. It sounds like something I'd still say today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just so folks know, David White is the son of Dr. William Harry White, who served on the staff of the old Ligonier Valley Study Center back in the day. And so David and his family were part and parcel of my growing up. They lived in a home that was, maybe 3 miles from the study center property. And so we got to spend quite a bit of time together, and just wanted to spend time today talking about some of those memories. I think for both of us, we're profoundly grateful for the context in which we grew up, and recognize that it's not necessarily something that you can recreate, but at least we're hoping it's something we can push in the direction of. And I just want to open up the floor, David. I've been talking too much already. Talk to me. Tell me how you look back at that experience. What was unique, and what do you see as a profound, the deepest blessings of that experience growing up in the context that we did?
Yeah, that's a good question, and boy, it's hard to encapsulate. When I think back, if you say just like you did, when you think back, what comes to mind, and it's almost like a movie reel starts to play, and there's just scenes and sensations and sounds that come to mind, almost in a continuum. But I think as I've reflected back over the years, I have 3 sons, and often I would reflect back to my own childhood as I tried to create experiences and context for how we relate to one another and other folks. And I think what was absolutely prominent is that though our family was a high priority and a core essential, that we would have family time, we would gather as a family, we'd set aside time as a family. Most of the rest of the time involved other people, welcoming people into our home. And I think being a part of the Ligonier Valley Study Center was just a community. And anytime you showed up onto that property, there were relationships and people and other families and activities and teaching and singing and worshiping. And it was just having other people in our lives was just the norm.
Yeah, there was and I think a very healthy balance. There are times that I think people maybe envision something a little more like a commune, which is not what we
Hmm.
had. And I think what you described about family being important is true. We were our own families, but we also had a great deal of shared life. And talk about those newsreels. I mean, I can't begin to list off those memories. One of which is you. I believe you were with me. We were wise men in the Ligonier Valley Study Center children's production of Amal and the Night Visitors. And when that presentation was put on, I remember also your older sister Corey doing a little flute solo. I was the wise man who was actually I'm going to ruin my whole future, as beautiful as it might be, by admitting this, but I was put in blackface. uh,
Oh my goodness.
but do you remember that production?
I do, and it's where my acting career stalled pretty much right after
Well, now I don't
that.
know about that. I've got more acting stories. I don't remember. I remember a Christmas pageant at Pioneer where because of my great acting skills, I was chosen for the critical role of sheep. And I was blessed to be chosen again to be the black sheep. So I had a black T-shirt with the word "sheep" written on it.
Oh my word. Yeah, there I remember I have fond memories of every summer, which is where the college age students would come for extended periods, because that's how I remember it.
Uh-huh.
There was always a talent show at some point along the summer lines, and I remember I think it was with David Fox and maybe my brother Matthew. I can't remember if you were there or not, honestly. Like we did a version of the classic Christian fireside song of "Pass It On," and
I don't remember that.
yeah, so we sang that, and I walked off feeling like I had done pretty well, and I remember Corey, my sister, saying, "Wow, your voice is really high."
Such an encouragement.
The truth is, I could have been 16 or 17 by that time. Who knows? Such a late bloomer. But yeah, those times of gathering, I think I have particular fondness for the summers, because those were times where I think it was every Thursday we had cookout, and
Right?
there would be a post cookout softball game and or volleyball game, and
Right.
then late after that would be Ghost in the Graveyard or Kick the Can or something of that nature. And it was just I think as you were beginning to tell stories, I think what was very unique about that experience was not only the familiarity of the people and the families, but the familiarity of the place. So to show up on that property, it felt familiar. So if you would run into somebody, they would know your name, kind of like the
Right.
old Cheers theme song. Yeah, you do. People do want to go where people know them and recognize them. I feel like I can just still describe to you various trees on that property that I climbed up and down. I have images of trails going up into the woods where we would camp and have fires. And if I remember correctly, there was a trailhead right by your home
Yep.
once you moved from Stone East up to the top of the hill.
Right.
I think there was a trailhead right outside of your driveway there, and an entry point there. And those were just all familiar places. I feel like I know every stone, tree, hillside.
Well,
Just
have you ever gone back and visited?
I have, and I'll be honest, it doesn't match up exactly with my memory.
Yeah, somehow
Think
those trees got a lot bigger for one thing.
they did, yeah. And it just I think there's a few more roadways or pathways around the property. I think there's a bed and breakfast there now, and but it is a um, yeah, to drive onto that property, it's a visceral. Um, it's a an odd combination of just overwhelming joy, but also just a deep melancholy.
Uh-huh.
And I
And
don't know
that's
where
a
well, I don't know exactly where the melancholy comes from, other than perhaps sadness at the loss, at
yeah,
the transition of time.
yeah. I think there's a nostalgia that carries a shadow with it. I know for me, uh, there was a very real sense in which that experience was profoundly Edenic, and it's my conviction that nostalgia is that longing to go all the way back to the garden.
Mm,
We certainly had our share of hardship and
hmm
sin and broken relationships along the way among the families
hmm
at the study center. But there was also just a great deal of peace in the midst of it. And yeah, when I go there, in fact, when I married my precious wife, I took her
mm,
to that property. And we walked in those woods and we walked in those same
yeah,
paths that are still there. We went to that main, we had sort of some satellites, but that main clearing where we did most of our camping. I remember a particular night that you were there, we're in that clearing and we're looking up, we're laying in our sleeping bags and we're looking up and picking out shapes
hmm
in the holes in the trees, that
yeah,
you can see the sky coming through. I mean, how bizarre is that clear, that specific of a memory?
yeah,
And yet there it is, and that you remember that trailhead right there. Uh, when Lisa and I went there, we walked around different places. We went to that clearing. We ended up coming out on the exit slash entrance on the far left side, I guess. I don't know my east and west, but the far left side as you're
yeah,
facing, the one which is on the far side of the Gooder's old house.
yeah, yeah,
Well, and there was something too that we were really blessed with was this array of friendships and relationships that was like I don't know how to describe it, but I have said it's something like this that I was profoundly blessed. Well, in fact, I was telling the story about you about uh, trying to chase you down that one time when I was like, "Holy cow, I'm getting old." I talked about how I used to be the little one when I would
mm,
play with the big kids, and it would be Bill Thompson and my sister Sherry and Laurie Gooder and
yeah,
Susie,
yeah,
and then when they sort of got too big to play games, then I was the big one playing with
yeah,
young ones, and how that was a really neat transition. And it even reflected on your own family. I mean, I was thinking about Matthew and how he was just so much like you, and probably still is, that he was small, like you were small, but really very gifted as an athlete. And even though he was, I don't know, probably 4 years younger than me, it was always good to have him engaged in those games. And that just kind of came up. We didn't have, I mean, we did have uh, Little League Baseball and midget football, but most of the games that we played were very much ad hoc and who's here today. And uh, they were just great. They were fun.
yeah. The I've often reflected, and especially in recent years, as I've now 55 years into life, and church has always been a central part of my existence. And as I'm getting older, I'm recognizing, I'm experiencing God distinctly as God separate from the church. That the church is certainly a place that He has ordained for us to gather to worship Him. Um, but as I look back over all my church experiences, and I've reflected on Acts 2, and I think you, in one of your recent podcast had talked about that, or maybe as you were talking about the church plant, it was just that where there's this gathering of people together, the breaking of bread, devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching, praying together, and I envision. I know Ligonier Valley Study Center was not church,
Right.
but that is what comes to mind as I contemplate the early church, where there
Yes.
was just this hunger to be together, this ease of being together, this sharing of things and spaces. You know, we as you mentioned, I lived about 3 miles off campus, but I felt I still have distinct and clear memories of and can describe your home, the Fox's home, the Thompson's home, the Gooder's home.
Uh-huh.
It just I know all the parts of those places. And your pets, didn't you have a dog, Ezra?
Oh, that's the best one we ever had. Yeah, we had lots of dogs.
Yeah,
That was the best one.
who was often mistaken for a bear running
Yes.
across the fields. But the point is that, you know, gathering for times of teaching, and even if my easily distractible mind was not engaged in the topic, it was fascinating to contemplate sitting under the teaching of people like your father,
Hmm.
like my own father, John Gershner. It just that these were the norms,
Yeah.
and at the time I didn't quite think much about it in terms of an analysis, but there was just such a deep comfort in those spaces. I think about the lecture hall of Stone East. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just such a familiar place, and a comfortable place.
Well, it was very much so. And, and I love what you said about these homes because uh, there was very much a sense of family to family relationships. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
just me and you, or my sister Sherry and Laurie Gooder. There was families bound together, and you know, which reminds me of that safety that leads to an openness. And specifically, I think about this. Uh, you may remember that your sister went to Young Life Camp in Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
Frontier, and or was it not Frontier? It was Silver something, Silver Cliff or something like that. And that was a like multiple day bus trip, morning and night, and
Of
all the way through.
course.
And I remember sitting with your sister and having this really earnest conversation with her, in which I was confessing to her that there just weren't that many men in the world that I looked up to and that I admired. And that I could name them on one hand, and that they included my dad, but they also included your dad. Your dad was, and in fact, I'm going to tell you one other thing. Um, just that vulnerability that I had to say, Corey, I think your dad's like really a strong, good man. And I look up to him, I respect him. Well, in another conversation that I had with Corey, she came to me with a burden on her heart, and we talked it through, and I tried to give her good counsel. And I was very happy to have done that. And it was a great conversation. Well, the next day, I get a phone call from your dad. And he's like, RC or Craig, I don't know whether he called me RC or Craig. He's like, I know that you had this conversation with Corey yesterday, and I just wanted to let you know how much I appreciated it,
Mm-hmm.
and the wisdom of your counsel. I mean, and this is this guy that's a rock star to me, just building me up and
Yeah.
telling me, hey, you did good, and you did good by my daughter that I love. And, again, obviously that's a cherished memory to me. Did you, I guess I'm asking, do you think your family had a sense of this community? I know, for instance, that your Uncle Bob and your Aunt Marcia were actively involved as well. Um, did you did your parents ever talk, or did you and your siblings ever talk about what this sort of weird thing was of this shared life with the study center?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we just went out. My father lives in Butler now, of all places,
Uh-huh.
and uh, and we went out to celebrate his 80th birthday
Oh my
this
stars.
about 2 weeks ago now. And I was sharing some reflections with him and just how impactful his orientation towards community and other people was on my life. And so it was very natural, if not impulsive, for him to want to inspire and support and raise up people from low places to high places. And that was true. That was manifest as a very natural part of our experience growing up in and around the study center, because we had so many people coming into our home, because his role was both as a teacher and a counselor. It was not uncommon for people to spend, if not families, to spend extended time in our home with us. And certainly we've debated as a family together with my parents whether that was always the healthiest thing or not. But
Right.
it was certainly familiar that we were going to defer some of our own preferences for the sake of others, and that has as a principle um, has stayed with me in terms of my longing to open our home and give our things and share our things with others. So that was very normal, and that was true of my father. If we were driving to Florida for vacation, we'd stop at a rest stop along the highway, and next thing we know, we've got some guy in our car that we're driving down to driving down to the next exit, so he can find whatever he needs.
Uh-huh.
Or my dad would come out of the restroom saying, "Hey, I just met this guy Johnny, and he's recently divorced without any job, and he would tell us this long story of this guy's."
Uh-huh.
I'm like, "You got that all at the urinal?" Like, I didn't think that was allowed. But it was just very, very normal. And so we were expressing to my father with a lot of gratitude and admiration, just that for him, um, just acknowledging that that was a natural expression of his. It was amplified by his love for the Lord and his heart for people to be redeemed by Christ, and it was also pressed as a value for us as a family and for us as individuals. And so yeah, I don't know that growing up we talked a lot about it. It just sort of happened.
Right.
It was just the way it was. I didn't know it any differently. And it's interesting. I do contemplate the idea of community a lot. As a physician, I have opportunity to spend time with people in their most vulnerable places, their darkest places, and a lot of the sort of philosophical goal so I'm an emergency physician, but I have a private practice where we do urgent care and family medicine and counseling services and fitness and wellness and things of that nature. And part of it is our commitment to know people, to be intentional of knowing people, not just addressing their acute issue and moving them on their way, but knowing them in the moment for as much as we can, and then knowing them over time. And as you know people, you can inspire people as you learn little bits and pieces about them. So inspiring them becomes important. And then the next step is coming alongside them towards those, whatever they're aspiring to. And then really the hope is that there's a consistent, measurable pattern of lives being transformed. And so very much different from just saying to a patient, "Hey, you've got these 5 issues. You need to eat better, sleep better, exercise, and I'll see you in 6 months." We recognize that if you send people out to make those changes in their lives and they do it by themselves, those sacrifices and the work that's necessary to do that is going to be experienced predominantly as suffering. But when you bring people into a community of care and a community of resources and help and support, encouragement, love, then all of a sudden it becomes this inspirational process where people feel like they're a part of something and they've got people that can empathize and relate and inspire them. And the church should be that. I mean, that's really, and I think we experienced that on all kinds of levels in our growing up, being a part of a larger community. There was just you just didn't feel alone.
Right.
Now, many times in my life since then, I have felt alone. I know what it is to be very lonely, to be broken and hurt, and but I also know what it's like to then come under the arm of a brother, a friend, my wife.
Right.
Just where there's encouragement, a pastor. But that idea of community is so critical. And I've heard you speak of that as you cast vision for the church plant, where it should be normal for us to gather together.
Yes.
I can hear you, number one, reflecting what is truly expressed in scriptures, but also I can hear and I imagine what your mental reference points are from your childhood,
Yeah.
and longing for that gathering of God's people and inviting others into that community.
Yeah, let me just, it's late to do this and we are running out of time, but just so our audience gets a little bit of a perspective about how this worked kind of technically. At the Ligonier Valley Study Center, we might have, I don't know, half a dozen at most students that are there over a year or longer. We might have a couple of times a year uh, a 3-week program where we've got 40 people there, and they could be prisoners on furlough to go back into the prison to teach Bible studies. It could be college students taking an apologetics course during the January term, and then there might be multiple long weekends where church might have a retreat or something like that. But we did not have the capacity, or at least didn't even make the decision to have a cafeteria as such, and that the way dinner would work is that these students would be assigned on different nights a meal at a different staff family's home, so that you might have during a busy month, 4 or 5 times a week you might have 5 or 6 dinner guests in your home. And then lunch we might eat together, and that was actually in Stone East, by the way. Stone East was east of Stonehouse Lecture
Oh,
Hall,
yes,
Lecture
that's right.
House.
That's
Uh,
right.
oh, and for much of the time, these same students may be staying in our homes, like you said. I had to give up my bedroom regularly for these students. One of the guys we had for a long time, what in our house was Hank Kenyon, whose
Yeah,
brother is the pastor of the church you and I grew up in, and whose father was a pastor in Butler, where your dad is now.
yeah, yeah.
So, and even that, I mean, there's still connections
Right.
from those days, and I get the chance to meet people who say, "Well, I remember you as Craig, and I was at the dinner table there, and it really, really is a powerful shaping thing." And you're exactly right. I want people to have that blessing. I want people to.
Hmm.
Uh, well, let me say it this way: it's not a cure-all. It's not a second blessing. It's certainly, as I said, we had our share of hardships and grievous sin going on, et cetera, among the people associated with the ministry there. But boy, it's an important something that we've missed. And you've heard me talk on these videos about the church. I think it's the wrong way is promoted by how we treat worship like a show, that you go and I go, and we maybe had the shared experience of we're watching the same show, but that's no more of a shared experience than if you and I both go to the movie and we watch the movie. We're not
Right.
with
Right.
each other. There's not a togetherness. Well, David, tell me, is there anything else? I mean, is there, as you know, we were going to have this conversation, you knew what we were going to talk about. Was there anything that you wanted to make sure that got mentioned? Were there any regrets, anything that you look back and think, man, I wish we had done this differently? Was there anything, any great, hits that I might have had in a softball game that you've just never been able to forget?
Well, for some reason, when I think of you in our childhood, and maybe I made this up in my head, but I picture you in a pair of black Adidas with white stripes. I don't know if that
Huh?
ever happened or not, but
No, no,
that's
it never did. I was a Puma guy.
oh, maybe that's what it was. I transferred brands.
Yes.
That's right. I think I had like Kmart or something.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I was admiring your shoes. But yeah, I don't think so. I don't have any sense of regret. It really is more a sense of, you're right. It was very imperfect. It's easy to look back and kind of create some utopic experience in our minds. And it wasn't that. I mean, I have plenty of, I was very, obviously a shy, not obviously, but I was a shy kid and spent a lot of time in my head. And so there, my childhood has a lot of thoughts of melancholy and sadness and loneliness and longing but I really I really cherish those years. They really are special to me. And your father was certainly probably one of the foremost spiritual influences in my life, just as part of growing up in a sense under his care at Ligonier, but also just pastorally from afar, and his teaching has been very important. And it's funny that probably many years ago now, but I hadn't seen your dad in probably 25 years, and my wife Jen and I went to a conference at Ligonier, or excuse me, in Orlando, and this was probably back in 1989 or 90 or something, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna just go up and just kind of say hello, and he might remember me, or I figure he'll remember me.
Uh-huh.
And if I can just say a quick hello, and I just walked up and I'm like, hey RC, and before I could even say David White, I think he had me in a headlock, and was like saying, I can still take you, I can still take you. He's like, feel my forearms.
Yeah. You ever seen a theologian with forearms like these?
Yeah. But it was what felt good about that was it wasn't just like, oh, I remember you, it's good to see you, wow, you've grown up. And it was as if I had just been playing Nerf football in your backyard two weekends ago.
Yep.
At halftime of a Steelers game.
Yes, absolutely. That's terrific. I didn't know that you did that. I do remember seeing Corey and Kevin at a Ligonier.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. An interesting, real quick and real interesting thing with my practice has a counseling service as a part of what we offer. And our counselor, her name is Sue Rook. She was a student at the study center when I was about 10 years old.
Sue Rook. I think that rings a bell with me.
Yeah, she was there. It had to be 1976 or something like that. It was when I was little. I actually don't remember her clearly, but we bumped into each other at a wedding, and I said something about my father working for Ligonier Ministries when it was a study center. She's like, you have got to be kidding me. I was a student there, and then all of a sudden we made all these connections.
That is something else.
And what one last story that it's important because I think it was my own theological contribution to the students of the study center is that we had about 6 students over for dinner on student night. We called it student night because we had students for dinner on that particular night once a week. And being shy, I would just always hope my father wouldn't ask me to pray in front of people. I felt very conspicuous. And so he did. And so I kind of head down and I mumbled this prayer because I felt like everybody was looking at me, and I looked up and everyone was looking at me, and my dad said, David, we couldn't hear you. And I said, Dad, I wasn't talking to you.
Good for you.
So I just needed to clarify that
Yeah,
for people that, prayer is not a display.
that's right. Dad, you're lucky I didn't go in my closet to do this.
That's right.
Oh, mercy. That's terrific. Well, I'm so grateful to have you on, and I would love to talk more if we get an opportunity sometime.
Yes.
I want to ask you to please give my love to your siblings, Corey and Matthew and Nathan and Stephanie. And am I missing anybody?
No, that's us all. Yeah.
Okay. And your mom and your dad would be terrific. Thank you so much for being a friend all those years, for being a friend now, and for being on the program with me. I hope, again, our listeners are having that sense of longing as they listen, and hopefully they'll labor to make those sacrifices necessary to have people involved with their lives.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, thank you so much, David. I'll talk to you again.
All right, brother. Look forward to chatting soon.
Thanks.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com and join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.